Welcome to All Basket Games. I'm Geralf and this is Vandil. And today we're going to take a look at Kunio-kun, the World Classic series. And this is the Japanese version. There's also an English version available. And I got this Japanese version because the Kunio-kun series is pretty unknown in the West. And I was sure that they're not going to localize this. And then they did.
Okay. All the games, or exactly
all the games,
okay.
Because most of these games haven't been localized in English, but they went and they did it. They localized every single game. So the Japanese version, I'm still fine that we bought this because it's helping me practice my Japanese reading. So it has 18 titles, 18 different games from the Kunio-kun series, and 3 of those are from actually the Double Dragon series. And there's no Japanese version of the Double Dragon games. Those are they're the same for the Japanese market and the Western market. But the rest of the games are sort of a mixture of the Kunio-kun games from the Japanese market. And some of them have been also localized for the West, so those are included in the game as well. And yeah, we played through all of them, and now we're going to take a look at where it all started. So Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun, or Renegade as it's known here in the West. And that's the one game we're going to be talking about in this video.
Some people know this game genre called beat 'em up. And I think this is one of the first games, or at least that game that kind of made it more popular or kickstarted this trend of arcade games going this beat 'em up route. It gave birth to the Double Dragon series, and then the Golden Axe, Turtles in Time is very classic.
Yeah.
All those beat 'em ups, and so this Renegade is a game that kickstarted that new genre, kind of.
Yeah, it helped make it popular, and a follow-up for the game, which was indeed Double Dragon, as you mentioned, made it even more popular. So that's sort of where all the beat 'em up genre game more or less got its start. And as always, whenever somebody speaks about where something got its start, I think important to mention that even though there may have been other games, like some unknown titles, which may have done the same thing even earlier or something, but these are the titles that popularized the genre.
There's many versions of this Renegade. The arcade version is, of course, the original, or the Japanese arcade version is the original, and then they westernized it, localized it, they changed some of the assets. Maybe in the beginning a little bit, but then later on it seemed like it's the exact same game.
Yeah. For the most part, it's like stage 1 and stage 3 where they changed the graphics. We'll talk about those.
In the arcade itself, or the NES.
Or the NES version.
Because now we're talking about the NES version, which is in this collection, not the arcade version.
Yeah. So to clarify, this game, all the games in this collection are the NES version. So there's no arcade versions here or no Super NES games. The Renegade has spawned several sequels. Many of them are not under the Technos flagship, so that's why there's a Target Renegade and Renegade 3. Those are not in this collection. This only has the first game. And then there's the Super NES Kunio-kun games. They're also not here because there's only NES games there. When you start to play this game, the first thing you probably notice is that the controls are a bit strange. So it didn't take long after this game for the beat 'em up games to find that standard where you press A button to punch and B button to kick. But in this game you're pressing A and B, and at first maybe you're wondering, okay, why is my character sometimes kicking and sometimes punching? And it's not random. It's a very clear control scheme, and it's just that the B button, or whatever controller you're using, the leftmost button, always attacks to the left, and the rightmost button, which is A in the NES controller, always attacks to the right. So that's the control scheme. You always, whatever situation you're in, you always use B to attack or do some sort of attack that causes something to the left, and A that always causes something to the right. And the only exception from that is if you press the A and B together. Then your character does a jump kick, and that always targets the direction that your character is looking at.
Bit confusion, especially from a modern gamer.
Yeah.
And you are really accustomed to that you specify the direction with your D-pad or joystick.
Yeah.
You choose the direction and you press the button, and it always does the same thing without exceptions. It's very clear that it's a very beginning of this. It's during that era when nothing is kind of found its standard yet.
Nothing is set in stone.
Yeah, because everyone is inventing new genres at this point.
And it's actually strange that there is another game that has this same control scheme, and that's actually in Double Dragon 2.
Yeah.
Which came much later and which is much more popular. So they did, for some reason, like bring that control scheme all the way there, even though Double Dragon 1 doesn't have that control scheme.
Yeah,
so,
but even though it's a bit strange, you get accustomed to it, like you said. And I tried it a bit too, and at first it feels like this is kind of not good, but it's just about rewiring your brain to understand that this game is controlled that way.
Yeah, you basically need to relearn to ride a bicycle, I'd say.
Yeah, and I was very surprised by this NES version, even though it's based on an arcade game. It didn't feel like that type of arcade game I really hate, that it's very brutal to you because you have to clear the area and then you can proceed to the next area and then you get all your health back.
Yeah,
and that was very
nice.
strange.
Yeah.
That it made very much more tolerable to play this game, because you always knew that yes, I cleared the stage, now I get my health back and I have a chance to clear the next area.
Yeah, so this game collection also incorporates save states. So I'd say that playing the game without the save states would have been absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I do think that it was like we later tried many of the different games, and especially with a game like Double Dragon 3, it feels like you want to save the game after every single enemy you defeat. But in this game, it wasn't that bad. It feels like there's that positive side of arcade games that you can learn how to defeat the enemies, and after you do, then you can be pretty consistent with like defeating the enemies and just clearing the stages. And I'd say that it's without problem, but in this case there was something strange about the controls. I'm not sure if it's like that couple of milliseconds of input lag or something. It felt like I had to like really press the buttons to make sure that my character was doing what I wanted them to do, and perhaps that would have been a problem if I had been playing on an authentic NES with like a CRT TV. But with this case, it feels like there's maybe that little bit of input lag or something that's causing the fact that the controls feel just a little bit off. I imagine it's just that. And it's really hard to explain, but that's just my theory about why that may be. But even aside from that, yeah, it felt like you can start defeating the enemies. You learn, I guess, learning the jump kick is like the most important thing in the entire game. And or I guess the first important thing to learn is that whenever there's an enemy behind you, then you can press the button to that direction and your character does a kick, and the kick has a much bigger reach than punch, which is always what your character does to their like a frontal direction. So that's the first important thing to learn. And the second thing is the jump kick, where you can after you learn that, that just makes a lot of the fights really easy. Until stage 4, where the enemies suddenly start to like punch you while you're trying to do the jump kick. So at that point you need to learn new strategies.
And of course it's a fairly short game, but it has some of those sections where you have 2 doors or 3 doors and you have to choose between them, and choosing the wrong door gets you somewhere you have to essentially fight again and then proceed to next door, kind of prolonging the game.
There was a couple of strange quirks in the game. One is that those doors, like, they're not like in the first... Okay, so there's a total of 4 stages in the game. And at the end of the 4th stage, there's this maze, where you always need to pick from 1 or 2 to, I guess, 4 doors. And you just need to navigate through that maze to the final boss. But indeed, it was kind of strange because I think it's in like 3rd stage, after you defeated all the enemies, which is, they're like Yankee schoolgirls. Those enemies that you fight in stage 3, that was also pretty interesting. And I guess they've kept that up if you look at the Double Dragon series, especially. In those games, there's always like one female enemy type somewhere. I don't remember if 3 had any, but at least 1 and 2 had. The other thing is, once you beat up all these Yankee schoolgirls who are waving their like school bags at you, then you get, there's like 2 doors that open, and you can go in either one of them. And one of them brings you to a boss fight, and the other one brings you to another room, which is, I guess it was a bar or something. And clearing either one of them clears the stage. So you can choose either door and clear the stage. But like, since this was in 86, there's no like indicator saying that you need to go through, or that you can choose. It's just on one playthrough you go through one door, and next time you maybe notice that, oh, there's another door, and you try that, and oh, I went inside. Interesting. And it has a different thing inside there.
Yeah, but the bar was something it was a dead end that you have to clear it and then get back out of there. It didn't progress you.
It does at that point. Yeah, so there's
that point.
Yeah, so there's another bar in the maze. And in that maze, if you end up into the bar, then it restarts the 4th level. And that's really bad. But in the 3rd stage, it just clears the stage, and you can sort of skip fighting the actual boss of the stage.
Point being that it's not a linear game. There's a couple of sections where you have to choose what door you go through, and especially the last act, or the 4th stage, is this building or office building where you have to beat enemies in the room and then choose between 2, 3, 4 doors. And if you choose one door, it does not necessarily progress you towards the enemy or towards the boss, but get you in some room where you have to fight again, and then a couple of doors to choose from. So you might get stuck in there if you're not mindful about what doors you tried out and what you haven't. At least you thought you can manage it without any walkthroughs, and then at some point you started asking whether I should go Google the answer for you.
Yeah.
But then you actually ended up in the room where the final boss was, or understood where you have to go to get further in the game, or to the last stage.
So I think when you first start the game, or at least when I first started the game, I really didn't like the controls. I was like, screw this, let's play one of the better games in the series. And but once you get past the controls, I think most of the game is really enjoyable. And that maze at the very end, I think that's the exception. I didn't like that at all, even though I had now gotten used to the controls and everything. But the maze, just because, you need to go through a certain amount of doors, and the rooms, they do have, for the most part, they do have different enemies. Or maybe they have the same enemies, but there's a different amount of them. And there's like a slight variations in the graphics. So in that sense, you more or less can understand that, okay, I'm in a new room now. And oh, this is one of the old rooms. But there's enough of them and not enough of variation that I got lost. So I kept using the save states before going into each door and checking, okay, is this a new room or an old room? Okay, it's an old room. And there were a couple of times where I thought that it was an old room, but no, it was actually a new room. And it was just, I should have, instead of just looking at what the room looks like and what's the enemy that appears, I should have actually beaten up a couple of enemies and noticed that, okay, this room has actually a different amount of enemies than that another room that I thought was the same room. And when I sort of got past that, then I eventually stumbled upon the last boss there. And
but they've really had to work to cram this arcade game into a NES cartridge. So I can imagine it's just part of making this game longer with using as few assets and background graphics as possible.
yeah,
And it's the during those NES times it was very common to use cheap tactics like that to prolong the game, to put some randomization or these kind of mazes. And they put the maze in the end because the game at first it doesn't really teach you it's gonna be like this. It feels like you just go to through a door and then you progress naturally without any effort, and then there's at the end the last stage is made into that maze suddenly, and you have to understand it's now a little bit different kind of game. You have to somehow manage through it. But those were the times.
Yeah, and I mean, this was at the point where this came before Double Dragon 1, and imagine that, you know, the NES Double Dragon 1 doesn't have multiplayer, which NES is very well capable of. There's a lot of multiplayer games, but back when Double Dragon 1 was being done, they didn't know how to do it, and this was done before that. So yeah, this was very like early times of the NES.
And for Technos, maybe one of the very first NES games they ever made.
Yeah.
So they didn't have that kind of experience yet to cram stuff into a smaller cartridge with less capabilities.
Yeah, which is really incredible that Technos is actually one of the companies that they kept making a lot of these games for the NES. And when we finally sort of get to the end of this Kunio-kun retrospective, then you'll see that the like later games, they do indeed cram a lot of control schemes to those like two small buttons that the NES controller has.
Yeah.
And they try to do all sort of different things, and like 4-player games or 4 players at the same time, and all sort of fighting games and all sort of stuff that you just don't see in other NES games, I think.
Just because they kept making more games for the same console, they got the experience.
Yeah.
That's partly why we are doing this retrospective, so that we can we didn't play these in chronological order, so now we're talking about them in chronological order.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll get this kind of sensation or understanding how these games progressed and the developers themselves developed or evolved into better game makers and could condense a lot more content into the same cartridge.
Yeah.
Maybe they got a little bit more RAM at the end of the life cycle of NES, but yeah, still it's very interesting to see how the next games kind of evolved already.
So once you get past the maze, then you got the last boss there, and that's another like kick to the groin thing in this game. So first you have to get through the controls when you start the game, then you need to get through the maze, And now you need to understand that there's a boss here, and he's going to be shooting you with a gun, and that's a one-hit kill. So
Hey, they made pew pews great again,
Yeah.
or back in the day. They made the weapon actually one-hit kill,
yeah,
which is realistic and interesting, but it's once again it's a cheap shot
yeah,
at the very end of the game.
yeah. It's like you go through a door and suddenly this new enemy is in front of you, and you're like, okay, damn, what do I do now? And you just get shot down at one hit, and it's kind of I was not prepared for this, but okay. And yeah, so that's kind of a cheap shot, but despite that, yeah, it's a short game, so they put all of these cheap things in there to make the game last a little bit longer. I mean, as I mentioned, it's just 4 stages, and the 4th stage includes this maze. So in that sense, the 4th stage, unless you know specifically where to go or get an incredible like beginner's luck, then it's going to be a pretty long stage. I'm pretty sure I was there maybe like an hour just trying out the different doors. And I mean, you always, whenever you go into a room, you have to defeat the enemies, and sometimes that room means defeating like several bosses at the same time. And once, like, there's 2 bosses at the same time, and you defeat them, and then a 3rd one appears, and so on. So it's a really tough gauntlet, but I think I did use the save states, but I think for the most part it was like I saved at the start of the new screen, and then I just defeated the enemies, so it wasn't anything. And you do get your health back whenever you change screens, I think.
Yeah, even in the late or the 4th stage, you get your health back every time you go through a door.
Yeah, that's something that they also incorporated in Double Dragon 1 and 2, and I really think that most games of this type should preferably have that. I really like that. As far as I understood, this game, or the Japanese version, the Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun, is actually like an autobiography from the maker of the game, because he was apparently getting into fights back in school a lot when he was younger. And so that's why, well, the maker is Japanese and the game is Japanese, so all the people in the game are for the most part wearing these Japanese school uniforms. And indeed, this is the main character Kunio, who appears in a lot of these who appears in every one of these Kunio-kun games. But there's also Riki, who is like a Kunio-kun's eternal rival slash friend, is also in this game as like the second boss of the game. So they both made their first appearance here.
Is he the first boss actually? You beat the guys
Yeah,
in the
the
tram.
first boss, yeah.
No, not tram, the underground.
And so the Japanese version, everybody's wearing like these sort of Yankee school uniforms, and even the girls are also in the stage 3, who you're fighting against, are wearing these school uniforms. And in the Western version, they changed the whole setting was that it's no longer like high school students fighting against each other, but instead the premise is that you're on the subway late at night, what was it like, or early morning, like 2 a.m., and some thugs come and try to beat you up. And I guess it sort of works as a premise for the first stage, because you are in the subway, and you are going to the subway, and you go in there, and there's more people fighting you. But then suddenly, like, you're on this...
Rampage?
Yeah, on this rampage. Now you're on the docks, and... now there's people you're fighting there, and then you get on a motorcycle, and then you're fighting people on the motorcycle. So the story doesn't really make sense in the Western version there anymore.
Especially when you climb the office building and go beat the CEO of the office.
Yeah.
Why are you going there?
Yeah, what's going on? And in the Japanese version, indeed, one of your friends gets like captured, and that's the whole point, that you're going to save him. And that's why you're beating up bad guys. But yeah, so the Western version, more or less, it changed that first stage graphics. The second stage mostly has the same kind of aesthetics, I think. And the third stage, which used to have those schoolgirls, now it does have... Once again, it's really interesting that they did keep like the... they didn't change the enemies to be men. They did keep the enemies as women on the third stage. And the fourth stage, I guess, for the most part. From there on, it feels like the game is once again more or less same as the Japanese version. So,
and there's no the ending, not really cutscene, but the Japanese one ended with the friend coming out of the door.
Yeah, you actually save him. Yeah,
but in the Western version, it just ends right there and then, and that's it.
Yeah. So just in case you're thinking about which version should I play, there's really not much difference aside from between the stages you get a little bit of cutscene and or actually not even a cutscene, it's just a little bit of text that comes up. And of course the Japanese game, in the Japanese version the text is in Japanese, so if you can't understand that, then that's the only thing you're really missing and nothing else. And of course the ending cutscene, which only lasts for a couple of seconds. So play either version. Or play both versions, they're more or less identical. Alright, so that has been our first installment of the Kunio-kun retrospective.
Yeah, number 1.
Yeah, so Renegade and Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun. And we'll be going through every single one of these games, so if you're interested in knowing about the history of the Kunio-kun series and the highlights, and you really should be, because these are some pretty great games that are here, and they are very much worth playing, I think.
And there are some modern games that get inspiration from these games, so there's a lot of new stuff to look into, even for ourselves.
Yeah, so make sure to hit that subscribe button, and maybe you'll receive a notification when the next one comes out. I don't know, or if you're one of those people like me who likes to open channels to a new tab and then occasionally check if there's new videos, then you can do that, whatever.
Yep.
And press the like button to make sure that we get to know that you actually like this comment, otherwise we don't get to know. Or you can leave a comment down below, or however YouTube has changed in the 2030, who knows, maybe the comment section is somewhere in the up then, and nobody watches the videos anymore and they just read the comments. I don't know. Anyway, make sure to leave a comment if you had any thoughts about this or any discussion you want to come by. We do read every comment at this point because there's so very few of them, and we'll be sure to comment on it. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.